somewhere in a small workshop in California, engineers just did something that sounds almost impossible. They took a piece of technology that has existed inside cars for over a century, and they shrunk it down, rewired it, and bolted it onto a bicycle. Not a concept bike, not a prototype hidden behind glass at a trade show. A real, buyable machine that families are riding to school right now. And the strange part is, once you understand what they actually built, you start to realize this tiny mechanical trick might be one of the most quietly disruptive pieces of engineering in personal transportation this year. So here's the question worth sitting with for a second. Why would anyone put an automatic transmission on a bicycle? Cars have them because shifting gears manually is hard to do while also steering, braking, checking mirrors, and not hitting anything. But a bike? You just click a lever with your thumb. It takes half a second. So what problem is this actually solving? And why did one of the oldest cargo bike companies in America decide this was the hill to die on? Let's take this apart piece by piece, because the answer says a lot more about how transportation is quietly changing than you'd expect from a bicycle. The company behind this is called Xtracycle, and if you've never heard of them, that's kind of the point. They're not a flashy startup chasing venture capital headlines. They've been building what are called long-tail cargo bikes for roughly 25 years, which in the world of bicycles is closer to a lifetime than a trend. A long-tail cargo bike, if you're picturing a normal bicycle right now, is essentially a bike with its rear end stretched out, creating a long flat deck behind the rider where you can strap on kids, groceries, tools, whatever needs hauling. Xtracycle didn't just make one of these. Depending on who you ask, they practically invented the modern version of the category in North America. So when a company with that kind of pedigree releases something new, it's worth paying attention. Especially when they give it a name as strange as this one. They called it the Swoop ASM. ASM stands for Automatic Smile Machine. Yes, that's a real marketing name, and yes, it's a little cheesy, but stick with it, because the joke is actually hiding something legitimately clever underneath. Here's where the automatic transmission part comes in, and to understand why it matters, we need to quickly talk about how gears actually work on a normal bike, because most people who don't ride regularly have never really thought about it. When you're pedaling up a hill, your legs need more mechanical advantage, meaning a lower gear that makes pedaling easier but slower. When you're cruising downhill or on flat ground, you want a higher gear that lets you go faster without spinning your legs like a hamster wheel. On a regular bike, you manage this yourself, clicking through gears with a lever, guessing at the right moment, sometimes shifting too late and grinding the chain, sometimes shifting too early and losing momentum. It's not hard once you know how, but it is one more thing to think about while you're also balancing a bike, watching traffic, and in this case, keeping an eye on a couple of kids strapped to the back. The Swoop ASM removes that decision entirely. It uses something called Shimano Di2, which is electronic shifting instead of the old mechanical cable and lever system. But the real trick is a feature buried inside it called Auto Shift. Once it's switched on, sensors built into the drivetrain constantly read your speed, your pedaling cadence, and essentially the effort you're putting in, and the system shifts gears for you in real time. The same conceptual idea as an automatic transmission in a car deciding when to upshift or downshift without the driver touching a clutch. You hit a hill, and before you even feel the strain, it's already dropped you into an easier gear. You crest the hill and start speeding up, and it quietly clicks you into a higher one. No thinking required. This is, according to Xtracycle, the first rear-loading family cargo bike on the market to fully integrate this kind of automatic electronic shifting as a built-in feature rather than an expensive add-on. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's a neat convenience feature, but is it really a big deal? Here's where it gets more interesting, because this isn't really about laziness or convenience for its own sake. It's about who these bikes are actually built for. Cargo bikes like this one aren't designed primarily for fitness enthusiasts or hardcore cyclists who already know how to manage 16 gears without thinking. They're designed for parents. Parents who might not have ridden a bike seriously in years, who are nervous about balance, who are simultaneously managing a squirming toddler strapped into a seat behind them, checking for cars, and trying not to wobble at a red light. For that person, removing one variable, even something as small as gear shifting, actually removes real cognitive load at exactly the moment they need to focus on everything else. It's the same logic behind why automatic transmissions took over the car market decades ago. It's not that manual transmissions are bad, it's that removing a task frees up attention for the things that actually matter, like not hitting the car in front of you, or in this case, not tipping over with your kid on the back. And this bike genuinely is built to carry serious weight, which brings us to another number worth pausing on. The Swoop ASM is rated to carry between 1 and 3 children, and Xtracycle claims it has one of the largest payload capacities of any Class 3 electric cargo bike currently sold, thanks to a rear deck stretching roughly 32 inches long. To put that in perspective, one reviewer who'd tested the bike, a rider weighing around 125 pounds, rode comfortably with 92 pounds of kids loaded onto the back rack, nearly her own body weight strapped behind her. That's not a small technical footnote. That's the difference between a bike that theoretically could replace a car for school runs and one that's just a nice weekend toy. Powering all of this is a motor system built by Shimano, specifically their Steps EP6 cargo unit, engineered specifically for heavier loads rather than a standard e-bike motor built for a single rider on flat pavement. It outputs 250 watts of continuous power with roughly 500 watts at peak output and 85 Newton meters of torque, which is the twisting force that actually gets a heavy loaded bike moving from a dead stop without straining the rider's legs. For comparison, that torque figure puts it in a similar range to some small motorcycle engines from decades past, just applied through a completely different kind of vehicle. This motor allows the bike to reach pedal-assisted speeds of up to 28 miles per hour, which under US regulations classifies it as a Class 3 electric bicycle, the fastest legal tier before you're essentially in moped territory. All of that power draws from a 630 watt-hour battery integrated directly into the frame. Xtracycle My Batteries, rated for up to 60 miles of range on a single charge, depending on how much weight you're hauling and how aggressively you're using the throttle assist. Here's something else that's easy to miss if you're not paying close attention to the wheels. Look at the bike and you'll notice something a little unusual. The front wheel is 24 inches, noticeably larger than the rear wheel, which is only 20 inches. Cyclists have a slang term for this setup, borrowed straight from hairstyling. They call it a mullet build, business up front, party in the back, because the bigger front wheel rolls more smoothly over bumps and cracks in the road, while the smaller rear wheel lowers the center of gravity exactly where all that extra weight from kids and cargo is sitting. It's a small detail, but it's the kind of engineering decision that separates a company with decades of cargo bike experience from a brand that just slapped a battery onto a normal frame and called it a day. Braking matters just as much when you're hauling this much weight, and Xtracycle didn't cut corners there either. The Swoop ASM uses 4-piston hydraulic disc brakes with 203mm rotors. Essentially the same category of braking hardware you'd find on a downhill mountain bike, built to stop a much heavier, faster-moving vehicle with real confidence rather than the underpowered rim brakes you might picture on a typical commuter bike. There's also a detail that sounds minor but genuinely changes the riding experience: a dropper seat post, a feature borrowed directly from aggressive mountain biking. It lets the rider lower their seat instantly at the push of a lever, meaning at a stoplight or when loading a kid onto the bike, you can drop the saddle down and plant both feet firmly on the ground without ever dismounting or reaching for a wrench. Then there's the part that tends to catch people's attention once they start comparing prices. The Swoop ASM launched at $4,499 with an initial $500 discount for early buyers. On its own, that number might sound steep for a bicycle until you consider what's actually included. Many competing cargo bikes advertise a lower base price, but then quietly charge extra for the accessories that actually make the bike usable for a family. Things like the child seating system, front cargo racks, wheel guards to keep little fingers away from spokes, footrests, fenders, and integrated lighting. Xtracycle built all of that into the price from day one. When you add up what those extras typically cost on competing bikes, the value gap narrows considerably. And depending on the comparison, this pricing can actually undercut what a fully accessorized rival ends up costing at checkout. Step back from the spec sheet for a second, and there's a bigger story sitting underneath all of this. Families across dense cities and suburban neighborhoods have been slowly discovering that a single well-built cargo bike can genuinely replace a second car for daily errands, school drop-offs, grocery runs, and short trips across town, not because it's trendy, but because it's often faster and cheaper once you account for parking, gas, insurance, and maintenance on that second vehicle. The barrier standing in the way has never really been whether the bike is strong enough. Motors and batteries solved that problem years ago. The real barrier has always been confidence, the mental hurdle for someone who hasn't ridden seriously since childhood, now being asked to control a heavier, longer bike with actual children on board. And that is precisely the barrier this automatic shifting system is engineered to knock down. It's a tiny piece of software and a handful of sensors, but its entire purpose is psychological as much as mechanical, removing just enough friction that someone who was on the fence finally decides to try it. So the next time you see a family gliding past on a long, oddly shaped bicycle with kids stacked on the back, take a second look, because there's a decent chance that bike is quietly making hundreds of tiny decisions every minute, shifting gears exactly when needed, adjusting to hills before the rider even feels the strain, doing the boring, invisible work so a parent can focus on the only thing that actually matters in that moment, keeping everyone safely upright and moving forward. And if a piece of car technology from over a century ago can be reinvented this well on two wheels, it raises a genuinely interesting question worth thinking about. What other everyday machines are we still operating manually simply because nobody has bothered to ask whether they need to be